Please be seated. In the name of the main character, and of his harem, and of the holy waifu, Kawaii Desu. This is a Radical Rand podcast.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Church of Weeb. Adam aka CS Radical here with you guys after a bit of a hiatus, but I am back. We are going to talk some good old anime again because, I kind of got away from that stuff. Now, the main reason for that being, I just couldn't do the simulcast anymore. I mean, if you guys have been paying attention to this podcast at all, I was doing every 3 weeks, I'd do a quarter of the season, and what happened is I started treating it like a job in the sense of that I had to get it done by a certain time frame or else, I failed. And it got to a point where I couldn't get myself to do it anymore. It's not that I didn't like watching anime, it's not that I didn't like the shows I was watching, but to force myself to watch it in a specific time frame, it almost made it so that I didn't want to anymore. Because there's other stuff I do on the side as well. I mean, now on the YouTube channel, I already have the VCR podcast, I do talk wrestling, now I'm doing things like gameplay and stuff, so there's all these things that I'm trying to do, and also I'm just trying to enjoy stuff in solitary confinement rather than having to make everything for this channel. I've been playing a bunch of video games and finally getting my backlog down a little bit because I'm not, constrained by anything. So what I figured I'd start doing now instead for this show is instead of going through weekly stuff, when a show is finished, that's when I'll talk about it on this show. And in this specific case, that being Log Horizon, as you can tell by the title of this podcast, we're going to talk about the entirety of seasons 1 and 2, which are 50 episodes in total. If we get to a point where there are a couple of 12-episode shows, like most shows usually are, when it comes to the weekly, or the weekly simulcast, maybe I do 2 of them at the same time. We'll see how it goes, because I don't even know how long this is going to go. The way that this show is going to be structured is I'm just basically going to go through the entirety of the 2 seasons. So again, full spoilers for Log Horizons. I mean, that should be pretty obvious. But there is a non-spoiler video on my YouTube channel, that being CS Radical on YouTube, where I go through very, very vaguely about the majority of things that I like about the show. And hopefully that is a better way of getting you into the show. This podcast is for people who have finished seasons 1 and 2. Because season 3 is going to be out in the fall, we hope, at least assuming things don't get screwed up because of COVID-19 and everything that's going around the world right now. But ideally, if things stay the way that they are, in less than 6 months, we will have a new season to talk about. Or at least a new season to watch. So I have no idea how long this podcast is going to go as I'm recording this. And at the same time, I'm probably going to have to edit some of this out because I am going to be talking about the entirety of the 2 seasons, but it's not like I can't remember 50 episodes off by heart. I'm not that good. So I'm reading basically the Wikipedia cliff notes of each episode and just kind of regurgitating what I remember from these things. So you may notice a slight moment where it looks like I'm just skipping from one thing to another. The reason for that is just because I've cut out either blank space or I've just jumped to the next episode and talking about other things. So hopefully this is a little bit smoother than I think it might be, but I mean, this is a first dry test, so we'll see how it goes. But yeah, Log Horizon, as I said in the video, and assuming you guys came from the video, thank you so much for watching that, by the way. That show, I remember growing up. I shouldn't say growing up. That sounds stupid because I only started watching the show a few years ago. Sorry, when I say grow up, I mean in terms of being an anime guy, because I've always watched anime in some capacity since I was a little kid. I remember growing up watching the last half of Sailor Moon and the first half of Pokemon. Every time I wait for the bus to go to school. Now I don't even look at those as anime anymore because as a kid I just think of them as Saturday morning cartoons sort of deals. But it really took until Dragon Ball Z was really the first one that I could consider to be anime. And since then, I went all over the place. I mean, hell, one of the first shows I actually ever watched on television and not through somebody bringing a DVD or I guess in those days a VHS Oddly enough, Fully Cooley or FLCL was one of the first shows I ever came across, and that kind of cemented my interest in anime. But again, this is still the days of, you either had DVDs or, there really wasn't a streaming service back then because internet wasn't that good, and DVDs weren't cheap. I certainly wasn't going to be able to get my parents to get, 4, 6, maybe even 12 DVDs of all these animes and stuff and end up, taking a crap ton of money out of their pockets. So very, very little anime was watched, even through my teenage years. By the time that file sharing like LimeWire and stuff came to be, I started at least able to get to taking a little bit more anime, and that's when I kind of got into weird little areas of things. I did end up watching things through YTV or Teletoon. I had like Gundam Seed I would watch a little bit thereof. And then randomly, I came across Infinite Stratos of all things through peer-to-peer sharing. So for most of my early 20s, like late teens, I guess, I was keeping up with anime, but it really didn't start until around 2015 when I became aware of stuff like Crunchyroll, because I was a gamer, so I wasn't really thinking too much outside of that. And by the time the Crunchyroll came to my attention, I was like, oh shit, there's a lot of stuff that I remember hearing about, or just, even things in general that from looking at I got interested in. So I started taking the initiative and looking into it. And one of the first things that really caught my eye was Log Horizon. And the reason for that was the whole trapped in a video game genre, which I do remember from Hack Sign, which I mentioned in the video, something that doesn't really get talked about a lot. Hack Sign kind of really just fades into people's memories and just in the background. Nobody really thinks about it. Everybody kind of associates Sword Art Online as being the first, trapped in a video game sort of isekai-like anime, whereas Hack Sign was kind of the first one. Log Horizon, though, like I've said in the video and many times before when I'm talking with friends about anime, this show does it best. And the reason for that is not even because, it's cool. Like, what the show does with this isekai treatment is so much different than what a lot more kind of shows do. Like, most of it's like them trying to survive or become the top dog there, or they're just overpowered as hell. What this show does is it takes that trapped in a video game genre and turns it into a slice of life show almost, which is so interesting because it takes away the usual formula, which is always something that if you want to grab my attention when it comes to anime, do something that's different. That's usually what gets me in the door. So in the case of Log Horizon, being in an MMORPG and deciding to go the route of world building and trying to actually build society rather than, just fight your way to the boss and survive and don't have to worry about people trying to kill you and you die if you die in the game, you die for real sort of trope that I really don't like. I've never liked that trope because I don't feel like a video game's supposed to have those level of stakes. That's what games like Dark Souls are for. If you want to make an anime that's if you die in the game, you die for real, do a Dark Souls anime where that gets brought into VR somehow. But in an MMORPG, there's the expectation that you always survive. You keep respawning because you have to try these things again and again. You could never finish a raid for the first time in an MMORPG without dying once. So to remove the death worries in this show, it at least opens up the door for a lot more opportunities to expand upon things rather than just making everything a suspenseful fight every time somebody gets into a fight because you're afraid if they die, that's it. Nobody in this show, apart from NPCs, actually pass away in this show. No matter how evil they are, they will come back because since they're all trapped in the game and can't get out, they're stuck there. So even if you defeat the evil player, they still return. And I like that because it means that you don't have to play this good versus evil concept and it has to have an endpoint. That thing can go as long as you want it to. And while in the second season, which we'll get to further down, I don't appreciate some of what they do when it comes to the player versus player stuff, it does at least open the door. The characters that you like, you don't have to worry about disappearing. Except in the case of one guy, and I'll get to that at some point as well. But I think we've talked enough about the intro. So you know what? We're almost 10 minutes in already as I ramble on, as I usually do. So let's actually talk about the show in itself. So at the beginning of the first episode, it's pretty basic, right? Shiro wakes up. It's Elder Tale. Everything seems like normal. And I can't imagine what it would be like for me to wake up in a world like one of the biggest MMOs I played for the longest time was Destiny. I could never imagine waking up in the tower. That would just be a culture shock, like a full body shock. I might even pass out, kind of deal, because it would freak me out that much. But for him, he seems relatively composed. Now, I've heard that it's a little bit different. It takes a little bit longer to get to that point, say in the manga, but in the TV show, it's pretty immediate. He just has the moment where he's like, I can't log out. Shit, all right, let's see what I can do from this. And that's as soon as you get introduced to Naotsugu, who is a fucking riot all the time. God, that guy's a pervert. I thought, like, general anime fans can be bad. Man, this guy takes the cake. And I mean, it works out great when you pair him up with Akatsuki, as we see later on down that episode. And speaking of her, I mean, what do I have to say? I think I made it pretty clear in the video. She is fucking top tier. So the moment that she even came onto the screen, and that's after she drank that potion, I was sold. Absolutely was sold. You take that, then she knees Naotsugu in the face for trying to say panties. You have Henrietta friggin' just fawning over her, and she's just turning into like this, and Akatsuki, I should say, is turning into this just like, oh, fuck off kind of deal. Her facial expressions, and I mean the facial expressions in the show altogether are fantastic, but she takes the cake every time. Even in the second season, which is notably lesser on the quality. I think the budget was probably less for it, which is why hopefully in the third season the budget's a little bit better so we can get some pretty good animation quality again. I mean, it's not to say it was bad in season 2. I wouldn't call it bad, but it just wasn't up to par with what the first season did. But it is what it is. But yeah, the intrigue of the show in the first episode, I mean, it doesn't do anything crazy, really. Like, the whole first episode is them waking up in the world, meeting a few people, and then fighting a couple of really easy monsters and just figuring out the system. That was the whole first episode. And even then, I was hooked. I mean, as a gamer, as a guy who has never really been big into MMORPGs like your Final Fantasy XIVs, World of Warcrafts. I really like Final Fantasy XIV, but it's the payment model that I don't like too much. World of Warcraft I had trouble getting into. I remember playing Guild Wars a bunch. Terra I played a little bit of, but I've never really gotten so deep into them. Destiny is the closest thing where I've gotten pretty deep into an MMO, but it's more of a shooter, and I think the action aspect is what helps. But again, like, the concept itself really had my attention, and it's why a lot of those shows always work well with me. It's why Overlord worked really well with me. In Another World with my smartphone worked for me. I mean, hell, like, even shows that are not necessarily video games, but they're worlds that are reminiscent of it, like Konosuba, which, by the way, I'm going to do a video on the new movie that just came out because it's amazing, and I needed to gush about that as well. And then even that time I got reincarnated by a slime, or as a slime, I should say. All those shows I love because it's such a stupid, simple concept, and it can take from things that I already like gaming, and just add a much more comical approach to it. Now, Overlord does a little bit different. It goes sometimes in a bit of a dark direction, but that's a whole nother story. But it is why I got into Lock Horizon in the first place. It's such an easy concept, and it's so hard for me not to get into that stuff because it's gaming, and it's stuff that I'm familiar with. And then when you mix it with the downright silliness and lightheartedness that this show displays, it just is such a perfect match. So as we move into episode 2, that's when we find out that, again, there's no death. So thank God that comes out of the way. But player killings are still becoming a thing. And as we come further down the line, we start to realize that it's not even necessarily because people are douchebags. It's because they realize they're bored. And again, going back to the whole thing that I was saying in the video about society being such a big deal of this show rather than survival, it's a big point of that, where it's, look, these guys can do the bare minimum just to have food in their stomachs and just a roof to sleep under, and that's all they need to do. They don't have any incentive to go out and do all these big quests, because what's the intrigue of it now? You don't have to think about, or sorry, you don't have things like, your own house. You don't have school to go to. You don't have a job to go to. You don't have these other things that we take for granted now in real life, especially now that with COVID, where we're sitting inside and cooped up and we can't do as many things now. All these things that we took for granted now, they don't have it all in Lock Horizon. They don't get to do any of that stuff. They have what's in the game now, and that's all they have at their disposal. So some people, I mean, obviously already in a state of mental panic, they kind of just figure out something else to do, and player killing kind of ends up just being something for it. So I kind of understand. I don't like the fact that those guys preyed on people, but I mean, it's one of those things that as I watched it, I went, you know what? I kind of get why they do that. Now, when you go as far as, like, say, the people that were trying to screw with Sera, which we get into in the next couple episodes, where they go to Susukino and eventually meet Yanta. Those guys, it gets to a point where it's a little bit ridiculous. Like, I can't imagine what Demi-Kiss is like in real life. Like, that seems weird to me, that a character that boisterous and that just downright, like, gross, I guess is the best way of putting it. I wonder what he actually is like in real life, and that may be one of those things we never get to see, but it's that intrigue, too, that there are some characters that you're like, really, that's a player? Like the guy's not role-playing anymore. Like, this is his real personality. Like, the only person that, as far as we know, is still kind of in a role-play mode is Akatsuki, and I think that has to do with the fact that she had to do it before when she was playing a male ninja before, obviously, she drank that potion to become herself. Because she even still does the My Lord stuff and talks very, very much like a ninja would, so maybe it is a bit of a knack with him, but I kind of have a feeling that as we get into Season 2 where we see him more, it probably is just the way that he is. He's just kind of a douchebag. But those few episodes were at least a good introduction on everything in terms of the subclasses, all the moves that some people can do, things like status ailments, and basically everything that you would need to know about the structure of this MMO. And then when you mix that now with, you're getting a pretty good trio in Shiro, Naotsugu, and Akatsuki. You now have Nyanta-san and Sera to have its own little thing there, because there's so many different relationships that are building in there. You have Naotsugu and Marielle. You have Shiro with Akatsuki, Henrietta, and oh my god, what's the little girl's name that they save later on? I think it's Minori, if I'm not mistaken. I'm trying to scroll through this thing too to figure it out, and this is the thing too, 50 episodes. I'm only gonna remember so many names in a row, guys. So you gotta bear with me here. I think it is Minori now that I'm finding it. But like, there's even 3 girls that are interested in him. Then you have that one guy from whatever that clan is. I think it's the Westwind Brigade, if I'm not I kept thinking something that started with an S, and then I realized, wait, no, that's not it at all. But you have even that thing where the one guy has its own little harem going on, including the one very, very masculine looking girl that's in there. But all of those things, they do a great job too, again, with the slice of life that builds in this show of having relationships, but they aren't like blatant, over the top, like endlessly flirting with each other, apart from Tetra, because that's Tetra. They don't go out of their way to make it this really over the top lovey-dovey thing. It's more of a natural, like, kinship, and they aren't shoving it down our throats. Like, there's the little bit there between Akatsuki and Minori where they're kind of vying for Shiro's attention, but it doesn't go as far as like them flirting with him and trying to like get into his pants or anything. It's very tame, and that's what I do appreciate about it too. It's not that I don't mind the stuff. I mean, I'm a guy who loves a lot of harem anime, right? But in this specific case, I think I like it better that it's not that far, because it would take away from what the show does best, and that's the political game that it plays. Because after we get through all the stuff with Susukino, that's when we get to the point where we start seeing things with the NPCs. We start have to worrying about, them dealing with the people of the land and trying to figure out how to avoid war with them. At the same time, they end up forging the round table to be able to at least try to figure out how to keep things in Akihabara to at least a normal, because of the player killings, because of people just having no sense of what to do anymore. Obviously, with food not being tasteful at all for people in that show, unless you, in the case of Nyanta, have a really high chef skill, or as we find out later in the show, like, you just got to be able to cook it, know how to cook it for realsies, and you're good. So all these things in the span of like the first half of season 1 is setting everything up in the way of getting all these groups established, all these clans. You get the round table together. You have all these other outside characters. You have like Krusty. You have, you have Marielle. I think, what's the shopping guild guys? I think it was Karashin. I think that was one of them. You had Roderick of the Roderick Merchant Guild. There was another guy that was like that. I just can't think of his name. But they get all these groups together, including Silver Sword, who we don't see after he leaves until season 2, and we get into the raids, which is which actually, when we'll get to that part, I'll even just spoil it right now. The raid of season 2 is my favorite thing they do in the entire series so far, because I love the fact that they took a secret raid because, I mean, as far as we know, I don't know if this was actually a part of the game. Like, it'd be kind of weird if that's actually something that was coded into the game. It may just be something that was created on its own to, I guess, provide a reason for how the money flows in that game, but we'll get into that more down the road. But yeah, Silver Sword even becomes a thing later down the line. But as we stand, by the time we get to about halfway into season 1, we have a really big established set of characters. We know most people's motivations. We know who's doing what, who's providing what, and now we have a direction for them to go. Now they know what they want to do. They want to get things normal within Akihabara, and they want to be able to keep it from getting any worse outside of that city, because the people of the land now, the NPCs, they don't have a single line of dialogue that they say or a single motivation. These guys have become fully fleshed out human beings with limitations, as we find out with guys like Rudy, and even the villagers that they go to the one time in season 2, where they find out that they only know so many songs. So there's things like that where they've at least made them human, but just with like severe limitations, almost like they're saying, well, look, level 20 is your cap kind of deal. So as we get further down the line, that's when we get into them starting to form things with, what was the kingdom name? I can't think of the kingdom name, but that's where you get to Princess Linesia, or Linesia, I think. I can't remember which specific pronunciation it was. But that's when you start seeing things come from that aspect. That's when you start seeing them look further beyond just, okay, let's just not go to war with them now. It's like, okay, now we actually need to do peace treaties. We need to work with these guys, scratch their back and they'll scratch ours kind of deal. You know, they're going to all these balls, and most of them aren't comfortable with that because they're gamers, guys. Like, these players, they're not like, most of them aren't, you know, big wig CEOs of businesses. They're not politicians. They're not people that are used to going to these really fancy smancy, like, ballroom dinners or over the top parties and all these things. They're all way out of their element, and most of them are just barely getting by. I mean, Shiro is really uncomfortable and tries to get away from it several times. Krusty is handling it as best he could. He's basically the one putting on the brave face. But at the same time, like, I love that too, because again, it's not just being like, oh, they can handle everything on their own. They're learning on the fly, like any of us would be. It's not just they know everything and they'll just come up with a solution. Shiro, honestly, people play the game of like, well, Shiro seems to have an answer for everything. Most of them are gambles. You know, like, he's fully aware that whatever he's doing might not actually work. Like, in the biggest case of things like the raid that he does in season 2, there is a point where it's very possible that they just fail and this all goes to shit. I mean, they could have definitely run with that, and no one would have looked otherwise. Like, just to say, like, look, this is just too impossible. It was a raid designed to never be completed. But in terms of forging peace with the NPCs as they stand, you know, it takes up so much of their time, and then you start seeing more relationships come into play. You see Krusty start to be kind of interested in Linesia, and it's hard to say. Like, I assume that by the time we get to where we stand now at the end of season 2, I feel like it's less Krusty is in love with an NPC, more as he sees his sister in Linesia. I would love, though, for that interesting dynamic of a player actually falling in love with an NPC. Now, that sort of is a thing, too, with Isuzu and Rudy. Although, again, Isuzu kind of looks at him almost like a puppy. So it is a bit of that weird thing. But there's 2 relationships potentially you could go with there at this point in time, where you could actually run with that angle of what would happen in this case of a real world person falling in love with a character in a game. And obviously it's something that happens in real life. I mean, we've seen the crazy stories of people, you know, either marrying a pirate ghost or their own 3DS with a dating sim on it. There are things that happen, but this would be a case where it's like fully physical too, because as far as we know, they're feeling everything in the game as well. So if they're touching somebody's hands that's an NPC, they're touching actual hands. So it's hard to say whether it's a true relationship or not, but at least it opens up that there's a possibility of it. And that makes things really interesting. As we go further down the line, we get introduced to a few more things. We obviously know about the Izumo Knights, which basically are like the legendary warriors of like any MMORPG that you never see. Or actually, in a few cases, like as a big Destiny player, you actually do see some of them. And in fact, you even revive one, which is kind of cool. But more often than not, you don't tend to see a lot of them. They're usually just there in the background for the lore. And in this case, the Izumo Knights so far appear to be that. They've all disappeared, and the kingdoms, I think it's Eastil now that I think about it, because I've been going through my head through the names this entire time. They've been trying to get a hold of the Knights, and no one's answering. And because of that, it's easier to talk peace because, well, an army of NPCs isn't going to do the job against these big bosses like the Goblin King, which they encounter later on. It has to be the adventurers. It has to be the players, because they're the ones that can get to those high levels and achieve the things that no NPC ever could. No person in the land could ever attain the level of mastery and the level of power that an adventurer can have. Even someone like Rudy, who worked his ass off, which, by the way, as we found out later in the show, Rudy is a person of the land as well. You're led to believe that he is just another role-playing player, but no, he's legit a person of the land who has just gone to the extreme measures of trying to become an adventurer because that's his dream. And even though his level is really not that high, for an NPC to get to that point, it's such a big deal. And it's all of that together that really shows how the people of the land are more than just, what we assume to be what NPCs always are. They're not just one or two line dialogue things that sometimes, at best, their hope is to just raise a flag so a certain quest unlocks. No, they're fully fleshed out people. And the most interesting one out of all of them ends up being Regan, who is this creepy but all-knowing guy who seems to know all these weird things within the lore that don't really have the most not that many people know what's going on when it comes to these certain things. He seems to know a lot more about how things work in the world than anything else, which makes me wonder what Regan actually is. I don't feel like he's just a person of the land. He may just be the source code, or he may be almost what you would call an administrator in the game, or even like a bot. Like if you look into like a chat room, say on Discord, and the bot that's able to handle all these things and knows all these procedures that it needs to do, you wonder what he actually is, because it seems like a person of the land is just too simple to nail him down to, because he knows so much that no one else seems to know, that you have to kind of wonder what's going on. But he kind of leads Shiro and others to kind of figure out what's really going on, and kind of explaining a few of the things that don't seem to make a lot of sense, including, things like the revival process and how the money might work, or the fact that there have been more than one apocalypse, or as what they call them, world fractions. One of them being what caused the monsters, and the other one being the adventurers arriving. So the apocalypse essentially at this point has happened 3 times. The first one was basically the first time the game was created. Like, that's what you can make the case for. That the first apocalypse, or world fraction in this case, was the moment the game started production, when the source code was finished to enough completion that the world was finally on. The second one would have been the open beta, the first time adventurers ever popped into the world. And then the third one would be what we have now, since the opening of the Novosphere Pioneers, where the adventurers have now become a part of the game. And we still don't know, and I've tried really hard to not look into it, so if it actually has been explained in the manga or whatever else, I don't know if that's the case. But as far as we know to this point, the apocalypse has not been revealed as to what happened, why it happened, even if it has anything to do with the Novosphere Pioneers or if it's something else entirely. And that's the thing that I like about it too, is that the show's taking its time. Now, if the show had never finished, thank God we're getting a third season, because I thought for the longest time we were never going to see one. What if we never understood what happened? If the show just dies, we'll never know the answer to it. So it's a gamble to have a show that keeps running but never really tips its hand. It never really explains why things are happening. But because of that, it's okay, because the show is able to divert your attention with either the other stories that it runs, with the comedy that it runs, with the silliness of it. There's so much else to distract you that you can easily push it to the side and be like, we'll come back to that later. And I've continued to do that over and over again, and I've never turned around and went, okay, well, we need to figure this out, because it's driving me nuts that I don't know what's going on with the apocalypse. No, it's never come to that. I've always had something else to keep an eye on, rather than to just sit there and be like, okay, just tell me how the hell they got here for the whole time. So after all this gets explained, that's when we start getting into the meat and potatoes of this first season, where the Return of the Goblin King has been activated. This was a seasonal quest that normally is the easiest thing to complete by the sounds of things, like some basic quest that, I guess collectively the entire servers, push together and do. But because they were all so busy trying to figure out how the hell just to live on this server now, they never actually attained the requirements to finish that quest. So instead, the Goblin King rised and united a great army, and now the army is starting to move around. And in the meantime, you have all the little ones, them after being saved from that one guild that was hoarding a bunch of earlier adventurers, that being Toya and Minori. You also had Isuzu into the equation. You have Rudy joining up with them. And you have this other interesting party of 4 that mixes with their own chemistry in the same vein that Shiro, Naotsugu, and Akatsuki have. And it's not nearly as good. I mean, Minori is trying to play the role of Shiro, and she does okay at it. Toya is kind of Naotsugu, but not nearly as funny. Rudy is where the comedy comes from, and Isuzu is just kind of the one that bridges it. She's almost like Rudy's the comedy figure, and she's just the one that knocks him on the head to make him say the line, sort of deal. But they're still pretty good. It's just, again, when you get to them, I don't hate them, but it's definitely not where I want the show to be at all times. So there's a point in season 2 where we get them on a bit more of a longer adventure, and that bit I wasn't too big on, because it did take away from the characters that I like to see more, but it's not like it's the worst thing in the world. But the Goblin King, as it comes back, everything is starting to kick into high gear. The people of the land are realizing, well, shit, we don't have the Izumo Knights at our disposal, so we gotta speed up our talks here with the adventurers so we can get this problem taken care of. At the same time, they're still trying to get the city of Akihabara kind of put together, although it seems to finally be kind of back to normal now, especially now that Shiro has bought out the guild building, which is how he was able to rescue Toya, Minori, and others. Which, again, I like that concept. The fact that everything has monetary value now in that game, so every building was buyable. And I like that his method, instead of just, defeating this guild, like challenging the leader to a duel or some cliched thing that would have been done in any other show to draw that person out, he just straight up goes, I just bought the building, I'm kicking you all out of here, fuck off. Like, that was his solution. I love the creativity there, instead of just being as simple as, I challenge you to a fight, if I win you let them go, if you win I'll join. Like, stupid shit like that. I appreciate that sort of stuff. So with everything getting the way that it is, obviously now the kid party has to figure out how to fight on their own. And then at the same time, you also have the round table, Shiro and all of them trying to figure out how to make the NPCs do what they need to be doing. And at the same time, we also finally get a bit more of the respawn mechanic, in that memory loss is a loss when it comes to dying in the game. This is where they put in stakes, but they're not high, but they still mean every death has some sort of consequence. So we obviously will never know how far this goes until they get out of the game. There may be a point somewhere down the line, it may even happen in Season 3 when we get to it, where some of the characters start talking about how they can't remember family members. They can't remember what the name of their own sister was, like, or if they even had a sister. It may come soon. We don't know. But so far, it ends up being more just like memories. Like, oh, I can't remember my dog's name from when I was a kid, or I can't remember what the score was of the championship game that I won. Like that level stuff. Like stuff that's still really important to a person, but it's not. They wouldn't go to the outside, back to the normal world to them, and not know who their family is, or not know where their house is. That seems to be the last few things that will be left. More of the memories they're losing are things that they might be able to get back to if they're shown pictures or videos, or if they're reminded, maybe it shoots back into their head. You never know. But I do like the fact that they at least introduce something to at least mean that if you die, there is some consequence to it. After that, they deal with the goblins. I mean, that was the one. If there's really any criticism I can have of Season 1, is that they don't really go too far with the Goblin King stuff. It's more of just something on the side while all the other things are happening at the same time. The only real big thing that happens during all of this is obviously Rudy, who, you know, Isuzu is known for a while, and apparently Minori did as well, but both of them kind of didn't really say much. But Rudy takes a mortal blow, and when they go to try to revive him or use healing magic, they realize that, oh shit, it's not working. Why is it not working? And that's when we find out that Rudy is a person of the land. And I'm conflicted because I don't know whether or not they should have let him die or not. It's a tough call because there would be a lot of value to him dying. It would really put out some motivations again. But at the same time, having Shiro come in and using his, what's the subclass that he has? It has something to do with just being able to write, he's able to write maps and stuff like that pretty easily. I can't think of what the actual name of the subclass is right now. But he's already done like contracts and things like that, and he figures out that if he writes up a contract and says, okay, well, Rudy, you become an adventurer with this, and makes the subclass of Rudy, who doesn't have one at this point, an adventurer, it actually gives him the traits of an adventurer, the respawning being the biggest one. Now, is it a bit of a stretch? Yeah, you can make that case as a bit of a stretch, but at least, again, it opens the door to other possibilities, and I like that. It means that in the case of villainous NPCs, there's a chance that they could come back if they're treated fast enough. You know, we could see that in Season 3 with specifically one girl who is a bit of a villainess in her own mind. That's an NPC as well. But, you know, you have all these things that are going on in the background, and this bit, it's a hit and miss. I still really like each episode. It's just this point gets a little bit where it's like, okay, this is nice. This isn't quite where it is. But again, when you mesh all the comedy to it, when you mesh all the silliness of things, the facial expressions, it's able to kind of bring it back. And with all of the stuff going on in between, I was still able to enjoy a little bit of it. Maybe not as much as, say, previous episodes, but that little stretch I was still able to get through. And then when you get towards the end where now they're, you know, back in Akihabara and they're starting to settle, and they're doing their own special festivals that they're making up as they go. And then you see the NPCs striking back again, and you have, you know, some of these people of the land that are trying to disrupt things, specifically one lord who's trying to completely destroy the reputation of the Round Table because they want to be able to run things the way that they want to. It's disrupting the balance that they hold, which again, it comes to any political play. If you go into a place and take things over, or you treaty up with a nation and that nation has new rules to it and people are living in a much different light, there are obviously going to be other countries that don't like that shit, you know? And that's when you see things like terrorist groups and nations that are going to war, or even just like single people that are trying to put their own vision into things and disrupting the nature of it, and Lord Malv's being that person, it opens up again the possibility of NPCs not just being background. They can be big villains. Now, in this case, it doesn't end up being something. It's right near the end of the season, so it's gonna be over and done with real quick. But it's the idea that the possibility now is open. There's a chance that it doesn't just have to be players running the show. It can be an NPC going out of its way to make things a living hell for the player base because they don't like that adventurers now are not even just running the game in terms of their power and just doing what they're expected to do, which is just go and fight off monsters. Now they're trying to create society in their own vision. And that is a major disruption to especially the way that this game runs, where obviously you have the lords and, the rich are by far who run everything. I mean, it's kind of like that here in real life, but at least, we can be autonomous on our own for the most part. But there, they literally have a say in everything. Like they can make every rule that they want. So when the adventurers start changing things, and technically these people can't do anything about it, because the adventurers will just beat the shit out of them. And since the people of the land can die, the adventurers just kill off a couple of them. Well, it doesn't really fucking matter anymore, does it? All these people can be gone in an instance. But yeah, as we get to the end of season 1, it's not like a definitive, like, oh man, what a great ending. It was the biggest door opening possible. The end of season 1 ends with so many possibilities. You have the chances of the player base turning on themselves, because there was instances of that. You have the NPCs able to turn on themselves. And you have the game itself seemingly creating things with this new expansion that are not told to the players, that are making things a much more difficult place for them to live. And it's not just as simple as setting up shop and you're done. And I appreciate that stuff, because most seasons have like a definitive end and that's it. At least here, it may not be a definitive end, but it's a definitive opening. And it allows for, in the time period in between the first 2 seasons, which I don't even think there was a break, if I'm not mistaken. I think actually like season 2 started almost right after, didn't it? I'm looking at it. The last episode, and I'm assuming this is airing in Japan, ended in March of 2014, and the second season started in October. So there you go. So basically it gave you like this 6-month period essentially where you're thinking, man, what if they do this for this show? Or what if they do this? It's a lot more cooler than just sitting and just waiting for a whole new story. So as we get into season 2, the story immediately pushes right back in, because the first thing we basically hear is that the Round Table's out of money. They're not being able to maintain the city because they've pretty much bought like every major building, so they have control of everything and they can kind of hold it hostage so people won't screw around. But they realize that you can't attain that forever. And, something has to change. And Shiro is trying to figure out what to do. And he comes up with this crazy idea. And that leads to what, in my opinion, is easily the best part of the entire series so far. So he goes and meets up with a member of the Kuni clan, which is basically the group of people that run basically the bank. Like, they're basically the people that are in charge of the money of the game. And Shiro confirms that there is a class that's not talked about, and they're called the Moneylender Class. And that's the one who has control of the gold that goes throughout the world. And he intends to go to where the source of all its gold is kept, honestly. He's going to basically the biggest bank in the game, and that's wherever the gold's made. The only thing that's stopping him is a raid. And like I said earlier, it's a raid that is meant to be impossible. So he has to go get the best help he can find, and he goes straight to Silver Sword, where obviously they want to do this because they're bored as shit. They've been doing a bunch of other raids just to keep their skills sharp, but they've had nothing else to do because they haven't found a new raid. So it's him and Naotsugu. Akatsuki's not with them. She's busy helping out with Lanetia. So replacing her for a little while is Tetra, who, again, totally a girl. But I guess in the game it is a female character, but it's a boy playing it. At least that's what I'm led to understand. Because you think with the amount of times that Tetra climbs, and Naotsugu, he finally knows that there's a bit of a lump, and he hasn't felt the lump yet. So I wonder if maybe it is just the case of the character itself is female, but the person playing it is male. But yeah, the idea of those three, well, I guess those two, Shiro and Naotsugu, and then a bunch of other people now raiding, that already got my attention. I didn't think too much of it because I'm like, okay, this might be some quick thing that they go through. And as we get further and further in, we realize, oh shit, no, this is meant to be like, this is going to be a long arc. Because it's not just as simple as, because when I think of raids, I think, okay, you got place with easy enemies, you maybe have a little bit of a puzzle, and then you got a tough boss, but it's not too crazy. It's always doable as soon as you figure out what the mechanic is, because it's usually like a special mechanic. In this case, there are monsters where the attacks are different, but they're the same monsters from other raids. And at one point, it gets to the time where they realize that this final area that they're in has more than one raid boss in the same room, where in fact there's 3, which is insane. I mean, I'm thinking like any game that I've played that's had some sort of a raid, I can't imagine having 3 of those monsters in the room at the same time. So they're trying to figure out what the hell is going on during this. And then at the same time, in Akihabara, you have this person who's just going around killing players. But normally in the city, there's always like a button mechanism that causes, whoever attacks players to be killed on sight. Turns out that that person is one of those very bots. So has become autonomous, has become thinking on his own, and is possessed with something that just wants vengeance. So all of a sudden, you have this overpowered character, because the bots are meant to be able to kill players as well if they fight in the city. So that thing's level is ridiculous and impossible. So you have this impossible raid, and then on the other side you have Akatsuki trying to fight this impossible enemy, and they're both getting their asses handed to them. So you have both characters, Shiro and Akatsuki, trying their best to figure out what the hell to do. Shiro's trying to figure out how to kill 3 things at once. Akatsuki's trying to figure out how to kill one thing that shouldn't be killable. So both of them have their own things. Shiro is more just trying to figure out how to get to his end goal. Akatsuki's trying to get to her own end goal, and that she needs to learn a teaching because she wants to be like everybody else, because everybody else has their special ability. And she doesn't know how, and nobody's really able to tell her what it is. And by the time that it gets to when she figures it out, it's the most stupid thing. And it's kind of meant to be that way. It's meant to be this thing that you don't just easily have access to. It's not just a skill that you learn. It's something that you have to actually... it's not a skill that you just put points into and you unlock at a certain level. It's something you have to learn by figuring it out yourself. Kind of in the same way of like, you only learn things that make you wise, the knowledge that you have in life, by actually making mistakes and by learning as you get older in your life. You don't just know everything. There are certain things that you won't know unless you make the mistake and learn what not to do. Or in the case of some skills, just you don't know how to do things unless you try it, and unless you try it over and over again until eventually it clicks. That one thing clicks. For some people, it's more natural. I mean, genetically, some people they click faster, but in other cases, some people click way later in their life. It's always like that. In Akatsuki's case, she wasn't going about it the right way, so it wasn't clicking. And eventually it does. She solves her problem, and they were able to defeat the enemy. And at the same time, you have the guys go through the raid and trying and trying and trying again. And it's such a long number of episodes. They switch in between the raid and Akatsuki and West Wind and Crescent Moon trying to collectively deal with this enemy. But really, every time they go back to the raid, I get so much more interested. And it isn't until you get to I want to say it's near the halfway point. It might be like just before episode 12, where they get to that final boss where they see the two raid bosses, and it just seems like, how the hell is that even possible? And they keep going, and they keep going, and they finally die there. He meets up with Akatsuki in the same place. They realize that, this must be the in-between, because I think it's the first time both of them die. And they look up and they realize, oh shit, we're on the moon, aren't we? Because they can see the Earth in front of them. And the place that they're standing on is very reminiscent of such. And as Shiro explains it, the test server originally for the game was the moon. So we see that it's not just Eldertale. There is a whole nother world out there. And that comes into play as we get further down the season, where we understand where this enemy that appeared in Akihabara kind of comes from. But as they go through this raid and continue to just keep me on the edge of my seat, because I'm sitting there being like, man, I don't know how the hell they're supposed to beat this. And then when they finally figure out that, hey, maybe the whole goal of this is that we're not actually supposed to do that. They realize real quick that, okay, there's no way we can fight them all head on. But the map is big enough that maybe, just maybe, if we fix things a certain way, we can fight them one-on-one. And they're able to do that. And even then, when they finally start to figure that out, it's just that they still keep trying, and it still puts things up against them. But because they finally managed to kill one of them, and all they really have to do is hang on, because Shiro leaves. Demikus, who has been on the raid this entire time, I forgot to mention that. That's where we see him back. He finally gets over his hatred for Shiro and realizes, you know what? I'm never going to get any better than this guy unless I can actually learn from him. And he kind of just accepts it for what it is. He's like, you know what? I may never get better than this guy, but god damn it, he's going to at least have to respect me for helping him. And that's kind of how that goes. And Shiro gets left alone. He's completely taken away from the battle. So basically the rest of the team is just hanging on. And he's able to make it into the room where there is a final raid boss in there. And you figure pretty quickly that, oh shit, this guy's not going to live. Like, Shiro's fucked. Like, there's no way that he's supposed to take on a raid boss himself. But when he finally reveals what he actually was doing, because the way that he made it sound like for the Kuni clan was that he was just going to take all the money. When he actually says that all he wanted to do was to get enough money to buy all the land in Yamato, which is the entire Japanese server, and reassigning the credentials, the ownership of every piece of land to the server itself, so that no one can own any part of the land. I'm assuming it means the player base, because, I mean, as far as we know, the people of the land, they still have their kingdoms, but that no player can control anything in the game. The game itself will run the game. At least in the Japanese server, the entire Japanese server is run by the server itself. No one can ever control it anymore. And I think he realized, after the amount of time that they had spent owning, whether it was the guild building, the cathedral where people revive, and everywhere else in Akihabara, that it was a pointless endeavor, because it was just creating a dictatorship, and it was not going to be affordable without becoming even more of a dictatorship. And that's when you see things like all the money going to one place, it's divided equally, so no one is able to be rich above the other. And that's when you get into the stuff where things can get a little bit dicey. So he realizes that the only option he's got is to make it so that the only control that is basically given to the players is the control over their own single life. And that is the end of the entire raid quest. Now, I talked about how that was the greatest thing. I mean, there's so much stuff in between. It's more just the slow burn of basically almost 12 episodes of them starting this impossible raid, failing an infinite number of times. We don't know how many times they all die. It sounds like it's a lot. But they eventually are able to overcome it. They don't even technically finish it the proper way. like Shiro just finds a way out of it by getting the final raid boss to just accept things the way that they are, and that's how that ends. And that's when we start getting into the point of this series and this show specifically that I kind of started not liking. So at the end of season 1, we get introduced to, I think it was Narumi or something like that. But she's part of a group called Plant Hawaiden. I'm not pronouncing that right. But, it's Nuria, now that I'm looking at it again. This is a group on a different sector of the Japanese server, because it seems like there's 5 destination points, Akihabara being one of them. This one is another whole thing where it's run by a single clan. It's not a round table like it is in Akihabara. And they are a dictatorship. They are a full dictatorship. And in fact, Noriha, who's being used as the leader, is not actually. The leader is truly somebody else in the clan who is also a member of the Tea Party and has a bit of a moody swing to her, is the best way of explaining it. She's kind of a crazy one. And the biggest thing that I really don't like about the series is that group. I said in the video that the one thing I really appreciate about Lock Horizon is that it doesn't just do the basic good versus evil trope. Plant Hawaiden coming into the game, or coming into the anime, I should say, I guess technically the game still applies, they make it so that this very common story now becomes a focus point. And while it doesn't necessarily become the main thing at all ever in this season, it keeps getting brought back up. And whenever it gets brought back up, I lose interest. Kanami's story when she's out on the Chinese server, because that's where she is. Turns out that she moved to Europe, but she's been traveling through servers, so it sounds like she's on the Chinese server right now. I don't know if she actually started there, or if she actually started in Europe, and has just slowly been going through, going along servers by just traveling. We don't know for sure. But with her little side story, it's a fun little thing. It's a nice side away. But then it goes back to the Plant Hawaiden stuff. You have the Valentine's Day stuff, and that's kind of cute for a moment, but it goes right back to the Plant Hawaiian stuff. I keep saying Hawaiian, and I'm trying to say Hawaiden. Sometimes names are a little bit too difficult. But you have all these stories, and every time that it starts to get decent, they throw this group back in. And every time this group gets thrown back in, I don't like it. Because I don't feel like any of these characters are interesting enough to be villains. They're just assholes. And that's not good enough for a villain for me. That's good enough for a villain who's there for one episode. But these people are going to be here forever. So for them, it sucks. Like, the reason that Lord Malves works in the first season is because he's there for 2-3 episodes and then he's gone. That's it. You'll never see him again, probably. These people, including Indicus, I think it's her name is. You have KR. You have the one samurai-looking motherfucker in the robes. I can't think of his name. But you have all these guys. You know they're going to keep coming back. Because they're players. They always will come back. And because of that, I worry that every time, and this goes for season 3, that every time that these really interesting stories happen, they're going to come into play and fuck it up. That's my worry. Because the story of the kid group going out and traveling to get their magic bags for the first time, there was some interesting stuff in there. There was Isuzu performing music and finding out that there's only so many songs. So the NPCs really love her just because they're hearing these songs in such a different way they've never heard before. So it finally gets to the point that she ends up writing her own song so that she can pass on one new song to these people. And it's actually going through. You also have the story of Ro 2, who is a female character who looks a lot like Shiro and is a vampire and is really funny and has like a sister thing going on with her, which you actually find out is Shiro's other character. Shiro has 2 characters. All these cool stories. And every time that it gets somewhat interesting, it goes right back into these stupid people. And I liked so much, and every time that these guys are coming, it ruined it. And it's a shame, because this season, as a whole, is still really good. And when you have the eventual end where it seems like the entire world is starting to turn on them again, because now, presumably from this test server on the moon, you're seeing now a third entity arriving, and they're calling them geniuses, and or at least in what Row 2 calls them, empathians. And that's not what it is. It's not empathy. It's not empathians. It's what empathians are what the players give up every time that they respawn. It's like their memories. I don't know. I could have sworn there was a second name for the geniuses, but I'm just going to go with that because that's all I can think of right now. But the gist of what's going on is that all these geniuses are starting to arrive and trying to instill the world of Eldertale into what they want, which is basically, this factory of just producing more and more empathians for them to devour, because it's basically the source of their power. It's like a resource to them. It's almost like money to them. And the way that Shiro kind of explains it, it's where it gets definitely complicated. Like, he says that his side character explained that she's like this artificial being. She's like created by an alien race that was sent to search other universes for a resource called empathians, which is what their memories are. And there's more of her on the moon that might be able to help the adventurers. Not even just in dealing with these geniuses, but to actually go home. And that's where we get to the near end point of season 2, where now the intrigue comes into play again, because this entire time they were trying to just acclimate to the world. Now they actually may have a path that can lead them to go home. And I don't know if season 3 will go into this that much. Depends on how far down the road we get. But the big question that will come at some point now is, do people actually want to go home? They'll have spent so much time in Eldertale. Will they want to leave? And obviously some will. Which also adds the question of what is actually happening in the world when all these people are not waking up from this game. There's 700,000 people that are either in a coma or they're just not responsive. Like, they're still actively awake, but they're not responding to movement. So we don't know what's going on. I'm assuming it's like a comatose sort of thing. But all these questions are going to come up in the third season. And the last little bit is another genius where it's able to actually even affect players, putting them into a coma in the game as well, which is the worst case scenario, because if they can't get out of the game, it's really not a good thing if they can't wake up in the game. If they can't even wake up in the game they're stuck in, how are they ever going to get home? So this last little bit here is just kind of like, again, it's very much like the Lord Mouths things. It's not meant to be like a definitive end to anything. It's just a last little arc to cap things off and open the door again. And when they defeat that, they're in this weird ruin that's very much like the Shibuya Tower. And we find out that there is equipment within this thing that allows them the ability to talk with people outside of the Japanese server. Specifically, of course, because everything has to be coincidental, he's able to get a hold of Kanami, who Krusty is somehow with on the Chinese server, because at some point, I forgot to gloss over this, Krusty randomly disappears. Just because of all the weapons in the game now actually starting to activate similar to what the lore says, he gets transported to the Chinese server somehow and ends up meeting up with Kanami, because coincidence is how anime runs. So at the end of the show, we now have that connection between Shiro and Kanami, who Kanami is the original leader of the Tea Party, and like the only person that Shiro actually looks up to. So there's all this. There's now the chance that there could be a way for these characters to come back to each other. And now the end of the show is with Kanami giving Shiro the task to try to find a way to get between the real and the Eldertale world, as they believe that it's at a point now where these worlds exist. It isn't a weird oh, it's a virtual reality thing and you're stuck in it. Because Elder Tale, as far as we know, is not a virtual reality game. It's just an MMORPG on PC. So somehow this world exists. So the idea is that these worlds will always exist now. This world will always be open. So the goal is for them to at least find a way to open transit between the two worlds. And that is basically the end of it. With Noria finally just, after meeting the kid party a few times and finally just, giving in to how much she really likes Shiro, because even she's being led by Plant Huayden to kind of just be the figurehead for everybody else to suck her into while they do all the dirty work. Finally, she just gives up and be like, well, I'm the leader of this group, so you know what? I'm establishing relationships with the Round Table too, because we need to figure out how to deal with this genius threat right now. We don't have time to do our own stupid shit. That's not to say that they won't do anything. I'm still convinced that this Indicus girl is going to eventually try something, because, there is that one NPC girl that viciously friggin' kicks the one guy into the train gears. So there is the possibility of this coming down the line, but it seems like Season 3 as a whole is going to be more focusing on the geniuses and potentially finally getting out of this game world and into getting back home, essentially. And as we look through all of this, it's tough because it's been so long between the two seasons that I wonder if Season 3 can live up to any expectations that people might have. It's like anything else that goes away for a long period of time and then finally makes a comeback. You only wonder if it can still continue to do the quality that it did before. My money would be on that I'm going to enjoy the show no matter what. It's just a matter of, is it going to be a Season 1 level of enjoyment? Is it going to be a Season 2 level of enjoyment? Or will even somehow be under Season 2, which, honestly, for the second half was not as great as I'd like it to be. I still, like I said in the video, gave Season 2 an 8 out of 10, while I gave the first season a full 10. But Season 2's 8 comes a lot in that right angle, and it comes a lot still by being such a funny and entertaining show. But the story bits kind of took away from things a little bit. My hope for Season 3 is that we get back to the things that I really appreciate, which is learning things in the game world and getting through them, and less infighting between the player bases. Because the players, I don't feel like that's an interesting story for infighting between them. Because there's no stakes. They'll all die and come back. There's nothing preventing them. No matter how many times he takes out a villain, if it's a player, the villain's going to come back. So there's no story there. There's no stakes. But if it's an NPC, if it's something within the game, that's a different story. Because now, defeating it means something. And if they lose to it again and again, it could mean more things get taken over and they have an even bigger hill to climb. So it's kind of the way I look at it. But as all in all, I've talked about the story for about an hour now, but realistically, what this show has always sold me on has been the funny shit. Akatsuki kicking Naotsugu in the face every time makes me smile. Henrietta trying to hug the shit out of her and dressing her in something cute always makes me laugh. Marielle, whenever she tackle hugs the shit out of Naotsugu, that makes me laugh. Shiro and Nyanta with their quirky mannerisms make me laugh. Sarah being the over-the-top, childish lovey-dovey girl who apparently is actually a college girl, that stuff makes me laugh. The show as a whole, it is the political game. It is the adapting into a game world without having to just worry about I can't die because I'll die for realsies trope. All that stuff is good too. Well, like I said in the video, the biggest thing that really gets me for the show has always been the fact that I can leave almost every episode of that show smiling, because it ends in such a funny way. It always makes you laugh. It makes you smile, with whether it's the comedy, the quirky facial expressions and mannerisms, the silly gags that happen every once in a while, the over-the-top solutions to simple problems. It's all these things that just get a chuckle out of me. And it's a big part of why I watch a lot of anime that's either comedies or harem animes or things of that nature because they're always lighthearted. I don't watch a lot of darker and more serious stuff because, man, real life is depressing enough as it is. I don't need to watch anime just to make me feel the exact same frustrated emotions. So when I watch anime and see stuff that's making me laugh or making me smile or making me just kind of turn my brain off, I love that stuff. And out of the 20 or so shows, and that's TV shows and films that I have rated a 10 out of 10 on my anime list, most of them have one thing in common, and it's that they make me smile by the end of it. Because they're all very good at that. Because anime to me is supposed to be my stress relief. And for stress relief, Log Horizon really does that in spades. So I'm going to cap it off here. It's been over an hour. My voice is starting to be like, all right, Adam, cut the shit out already. We get it. You like Log Horizon. So I'm going to end it off here. Thank you so much for checking out this podcast. I don't know how soon the next one will come up when it comes to the Church of Weeb podcast. It really just is dependent on my time schedule. I mean, I'm still working in full, regardless of what's going on with COVID. And it honestly just depends on me having stuff to talk about. Now I have the Konosuba film to talk about, so there will be at least that. I don't think I can go on that for an hour, but there's at least options. And same goes for videos. Every time I do one of these podcasts, I'm making a video to go with it because I want to keep a shorter video as a non-spoiler review of things, and then the podcast is being used for me to just completely gush about these things in full spoilers. So that's the plan from here on out. No time frame for it. If I told you it was going to happen weekly, I'd be lying. It might not even be one for the rest of... It may even take to like mid to late April for the next one of these to come out. I don't know. I have no idea. It depends on how much time I can fit into it, right? So with that being said, guys, thank you so much for checking out the podcast. If you're listening to this on any available platform that has a rating system, please rate the podcast. I don't even care what you rate it. Don't rate it a 1-star, I guess. Like, give me at least 3 or 4. I'll take that. And obviously share the link with your friends. That includes the video if you watch that as well. And then when it comes to anything, like if you got comments, please leave them. I mean, if there's no available way to comment on the podcast itself, you can reach me on Twitter at csradical, or there is my email that you can reach me, which is askcsradical@gmail.com. So thank you so much, guys. And I cannot wait for October for Log Horizon 3 because... man, I was shocked to even hear that being announced because I figured we were done. I figured Season 2 was where we're just going to stop because it'd been over 5 years since we'd seen that series come back. So I guess now that Season 3 is coming out, all I can say is, man, how cool would it be to have an actual Elder Tale MMORPG? But I digress. So guys, thank you one more time, and we'll see you on the next episode of Church of Weeb. Take it easy, guys.